Court has dissolved the party of ousted President Zain al-Abidine bin Ali. The Constitutional Democratic Rally, or RCD, was suspended last month pending the court's ruling. Well, it's Inside Story next. We'll be back with another news update. Stay with us.
Muammar Gaddafi slams Western countries as they weigh the option of a no-fly zone over Libya and dismisses Libya's rebels as traitors. But as Gaddafi becomes increasingly isolated, what are his options? And as the standoff continues, would an international military intervention be the right solution? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rida Fakhri. Calls are mounting for the imposition of a no-fly zone over Libya, but with no single nation willing to take the lead, what options lie ahead for Libya's future? Zainab Walji has more.
They say it's from the sky that they are most vulnerable. And for Libyan rebels, UN resolutions and asset freezes are not enough. They are increasing their demands on the international community to establish a no-fly zone over Libya, a move supported by the British government, though with caution.
Work is going on in NATO on the contingency planning for this, so it is certainly a practical possibility. It has to have, though, the other factors that I was mentioning earlier. It has to have a clear legal base. It has to have the necessary international support, broad support in the region itself. Now, clearly, there are elements of those things there. In terms of, as I mentioned earlier, the statement of the GCC. And clearly, the opposition forces in Libya itself have already called for a no-fly zone. So those things are practical, but the broad international support and legal base for it would also have to be there.
The White House, too, has made it clear they are considering their next move.
We've got NATO, as we speak, consulting in Brussels around a wide range of potential options, including potential military options, in response to the violence that continues to take place inside of Libya.
But this move would require military intervention, making it much easier to talk about than actually implement. And there is by no means unanimity among the UN Security Council, with both Russia and China insisting that Libyans must solve their own problems. So with Libya on the brink of civil war, what options lie ahead? For one thing, the recognition of the National Council, formed by rebel leaders, as a legitimate alternative ruling body in Libya would weaken Gaddafi's regime. France and the EU have already endorsed the National Council, and two members have met with French Foreign Minister Alain Juppé in Paris on Wednesday, and the EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton is also planning to meet them. But the European Parliament is split over what measures the EU should take to help the Libyan opposition, with rebel leaders calling for military assistance without direct military involvement. A solution to Libya's current crisis still seems a long way off. All the while, Muammar Gaddafi's forces will continue to try to take back areas now under rebel control, and the numbers of casualties will undoubtedly escalate. Zainab Walji, Inside Story.
Well, for more on all this, we're joined now by our three guests. From Texas, Mansour Al-Kikhya, the chairman of the Political Science Department of the University of Texas at San Antonio. From Washington, D.C., Henry Schuler, a former American diplomat who served in Benghazi in the early 1960s. Schuler was one of the few Americans to meet Gaddafi after the coup in 1970. And joining us here from Doha, Libyan political analyst Ibrahim Jibril. Welcome to you all to this edition of Inside Story. Ibrahim Jibril, as much of the world continues to debate what to do with the situation in Libya, the idea of a no-fly zone is gaining increasing traction, at least in some capitals. Do you see it as being in the long-term interest of Libya to have what will most likely be, in the end, a Western US-led military intervention?
Well, under the umbrella of the United Nations, and this is what we have been talking about all along, we have been clear that we're not asking for any one unilateral move from any Western country to impose a no-fly zone or to get engaged in the political and the revolution that's taken place in Libya. But we have said all along that under the umbrella of the United Nations and the Security Council, that a no-fly zone should be imposed. We think that this is relevant and this is critically important to at least diminish, if not stop altogether, the onslaught that is going on now by Gaddafi and his regime.
But whether it is imposed with, perhaps under the guise of a Security Council resolution or not, it does amount, doesn't it, to an act of war. This kind of military escalation of the conflict, do you see it as being in the long-term interest of Libya, or would it simply play into the hands of Colonel Gaddafi, giving him some kind of justification for retaliation?
I honestly don't see an escalation beyond what today is from the air and the sea and the ground. People are getting bombarded and they are getting shot at, bombs are getting dropped, missiles are getting fired at them. I don't see any further escalation. What would it be? How much worse can it get for the man on the street or the woman or the child in Zawiya today? How much worse can it get? What happens is that what would happen is that Gaddafi will not be able to fly his planes over Zawiya or Ras Lanuf or anywhere else, or Benghazi for that matter, or Tripoli. And that means also on the ground, maybe, just maybe, that the people of Libya can at least face Gaddafi and his troops eye to eye and man to man, as they say, rather than to have this unequal confrontation that we are just witnessing.
Mansour al-Kikhya, how effective do you think a no-fly zone will be? It will require the military attack of Libya's air defense systems, but beyond that, will it protect the civilians in Libya? Will it force President or leader Muammar Gaddafi to leave power, do you think?
Well, let me tell you one thing. I want to take a different track from what Ali said. It's a little bit different. First of all, I do think that the international community needs to assume responsibility and remove this madman. He has not only hurt Libya, he has hurt the world. And it's about time that the world stood up for something and said, hey, you cannot do this anymore. Can you imagine if this guy had nuclear weapons, what he would have done? I mean, it isn't only Libyans right now. Libyans are asking for a small thing. The new no-fly zone is basically irrelevant, if you can say. But I think it is a war. It is a declaration of war against Gaddafi. The world should at least the civilized society, should make a stand vis-a-vis this man. Should then make a stand vis-a-vis such regimes and say, you cannot do this to your people. You cannot do this to anyone. And if it needs a no-fly zone, impose a no-fly zone. If it needs supplying the people with weapons, supply them with weapons.
But doesn't this complicate perhaps the situation?
There has to be a very
the imposition of this no-fly zone by Western powers and others, does it not risk undermining the nationalist domestic nature of this uprising?
I don't think it will. I think for those people who are dying down there, they don't really care where that help is coming from, and for most Libyans as well. Libyans want to see they're at the end of this man. And the imposition of no-fly zone will not make a slightest bit of difference to somebody who's having a son or a daughter killed.
Henry Schuler, you met Muammar Gaddafi. You sat down with him for a couple of hours back in the 1980s. He's made it quite clear time and again that he has no official position to step down from. And he's also said that he will fight in Libya until the last bit of blood. Do you have any doubt that he will do just that? Do you think that there is